I keep about three or four copies of the canvas just by my desk. It's a book that's worthwhile buying if you are interested in.
Are you on commission or something?
The custard in between the
Are we talking custard creams?
Custard creams, yeah. I wasn't quite sure what.
Not the ham in the sandwich, then.
Not the ham in the sandwich. I don't know whether it's worth. I did think, and maybe this is being self-indulgent, but for each of these, we could almost go through and say what our business model canvas would say.
Yeah. As long as you thought about it. If you're going to put me on the spot. Could somebody else copy your business today by having a facsimile copy of your office, maybe even same types of people, without knowing what you know?
No. And I think, given the current climate that we're in, I think there'll be more and more businesses looking at how do we variabilize our costs.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast, brought to you by Wellmeadow, who are growth partners for businesses across the UK, based on our expertise of HubSpot and business meetings. So last few episodes, what we've been talking about recently, we did a double bill with Rod Plummer, 94, 95. Someone said he sounded a bit like Nigel Farage. He was certainly a loud chap. So even though I was trying my best to get him to be quite close to the microphone like you are there, he was leaning back, if anybody could see on camera, a good metre or so further back from Richard. But thankfully his voice carried like a thespian out to the stalls of the theatre. So he gave us 2 hours solid of business stories and anecdotes and so on. And you had to listen quite a way through to pick up some of them, but there's some absolute gems in there. They really were. So if you've waded through those and found some of those gems, then I hope you enjoyed listening to Rod's stories. Episode 93 was before that, and that was around proposals and quotes. And we talked about that. I think we've been doing a couple that week, and it was all about the research that McKinsey had done on the speed of getting the quote out. And it shows a lot more than just that you got your quote. And episode 92 before that was customer acquisition strategies, which is on the back of go-to-market, which was the previous episode, which I think is now our record-breaking YouTube video.
Nearly 12,000 people
12,000 views.
Subjected themselves to...
What's scary is the number of minutes watched. It's all very well seeing that 12,000 people have watched us wobbling on, but not just turned it on and turned it off again. They've actually sat and...
I think we might have missed one there as well. We did the personalisation one.
We did. So that means this is episode 97.
It is 97, yeah, because that was 96. There's so many now that we're losing track.
I'm losing track. You're right. This is episode 97. Gosh, as you can tell, as we're getting closer to 100, it's
all just blurring into one
fever.
Massive
just a few more
fan mail.
So this week's episode, this is your idea, and if anybody's watching on camera, they might see a little clue because you've got a book next to you on the table.
Yeah, it's come up a bit recently, talking about business model canvas, which is a well-known and quite popular method for coming up with a business model and thinking it through, based off the work of Alexander Osterwalder, who did it as part of his PhD.
I remember there was an interesting story. It's in the foreword or the intro, isn't it, talking about how he did it. It was, as you say, part of his PhD, but it wasn't just him that wrote it. It was some sort of crowdsourced thing.
I think there was a lot of different people inputted into the writing of the book and how it was published, and it was almost a attempt at business model innovation as part of writing the book. But he goes through it in quite a lot of detail. I definitely think it's a book that's worthwhile buying if you are interested in...
Are you on commission or something?
No, but it's actually a nice book just to have as
it's well done. It's nice.
It's nicely published.
Stuff. Is there not a sister companion volume as well to do with
value proposition design,
right?
Which focuses more on the value proposition element of the business model canvas,
which is the middle bit of
the
business model canvas.
The whatever it is, the custard in between the
Are we talking custard creams?
Custard creams, yeah. I wasn't quite sure what.
Not the ham in the sandwich, then.
Not the ham in the sandwich.
No.
But it's not really the custard between the creams,
jam in the donut.
Is it? It's not really the custard between the creams. It's the custard cream in between the biscuit, isn't it?
Anyway. You know, sometimes when you start with a metaphor and you think you're losing control of it, it develops a life of its own, doesn't it?
Running away, which is exactly why you need a system for these things, which is what the business model canvas does.
Oh, nice. I like what you tried to do. I'm not sure that worked either, but I like what you tried
rescued.
to do.
So anyway, it's come up a couple of times recently. We've used it quite extensively in various places that we've worked. It's quite a clear way.
It's quite tactile as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not something you just have to throw up on the projector screen or on the telly and talk through. You can actually get a big printed version or just do whatever you want. And it's a sticky note thing.
Sticky note thing. I mean, I keep about three or four copies of the canvas just by my desk.
Yeah.
And that way, if ever I'm thinking about something, it's just a good way of scribbling down ideas.
Yeah.
Even if you're not getting into the business model thinking per se, just having those kind of categories to park your thoughts into can be quite useful.
Yeah.
Useful exercise.
Now, one of the things that I've heard said about it is that it's directed more for startups, but we've found we don't do with many startups, do we? We tend to work with established companies that are looking to push forward and grow. So we've found it more useful in that area, really, rather than startup. I can see how you would use it in a startup, but we've used it even in M&A activities, haven't we? We've written information memorandums for companies that are looking to sell.
No, it's a very good way of sort of summarising the position of a business. And if you're trying to explain it to investors, or if you're trying to explain it, just or wrap your head around it. And I think where we use it, definitely for startups. If you're thinking about what is our business model going to be, but I think oftentimes the business model can maybe get a little bit cloudy in established companies, and actually using something like the business model canvas can really...
Well, it drifts anyway, but also it's quite complicated as you adopt new areas of the business, each of which maybe have a slightly different model, and yet they're not necessarily explicitly split out.
Yeah, we could go through some...
Sorry, I was just going to ask about Strategizer in case we need to name check them. Is that the company that has the license for this thing now? Or you see that quite a lot, don't you?
I don't know if it has a license, but I think that's Alexander Osterwalder's company.
Oh, that's his company, right. Okay.
So they do a lot of workshops and things around it, and you can sign up to their website for free and get access to their tools and all that kind of stuff.
So for the video and in the show notes, we ought to put a link and an image of what this canvas looks like, because it's basically a one-page business strategy.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is you can print it out on an A4 as well.
Yeah.
And it's not such a massive model that it can't fit on an A4, and you can just scribble on it whilst you're having a coffee.
Nice, isn't it? And if you need a quick one-page summary of it, then it's not a bad way of
homework for all listeners.
Describe your company's strategy or your business model.
The business model canvas
in one page on that.
Put it on a page.
So shall I just try and quickly describe it from memory in my head, and then you talk us through the various bits of it?
Yep.
So it's often presented in landscape format, isn't it, this canvas? And there's kind of some boxes along the top and then a couple of boxes along the bottom. And there are 9 boxes in total. And the middle bit of the top row, and the top row is sort of 80% of the height of the thing, isn't it?
Yep.
That's the value proposition box. So that's where you talk about what you do. And then to the right, you go more towards the customer, and to the left, you go more towards the supplier, or what they call the partners.
Yep.
So the very far right is the customers, or the segments, whatever. And then the bridge between the value proposition and them, you've got customer relationships and channels.
Yep.
So how do you get to them, how do you look after them, type of thing. And then on the left, where it goes more towards the suppliers, on the far left, you've got the partners. And the gap in between the value proposition and that are your key activities and your key resources. So we'll come back to that. And then underneath, you've just got 2 boxes that sort of split the page in half in the bottom row. It's basically costs and revenue. So it's kind of the financial element of it. So I don't know if people have managed to follow that. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, because you haven't got something to look at, I've tried to just describe
Paint a picture with words.
A castle in the air. There you go. A picture with words. But that proves, if anything else, that a picture says 1,000 words, because it'll be a lot easier to understand it if you get to see it.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of model. So when you describe it to people, where do you start? You start in the middle, or do you start at the customer end and come back from there, or do you just sort of do it differently every time?
I tend to start in the middle. I don't really know why. It's just...
Well, I always start in the middle. Because for me,
like
the value proposition is often the first thing you get people to properly articulate.
Yeah.
Because unless I've understood how they describe their value proposition, I then don't know how to interpret their answers to who their customers are and channels, that sort of thing. So I don't know, well, what you're selling them. It could be that something that your company does appeal to those customers in that way, but not this thing. So
I think when we talk about value proposition, it's really what is the value that you deliver to your customer segments? What is it that
What's the problem you're trying to solve?
What do you solve? How do you solve it? And there's a whole book that he's written based on just designing your value proposition and really getting under the skin of it. So there's no way that we're going to be able to do justice to it in the 2 seconds.
No, but do you know what? A bit like a lot of management books, it's sort of boiled down to a very important key concept that you then flesh a book out of.
Yeah.
Unlike this one, I think the business model canvas book has got a lot more to it. It's got examples and stuff. But that value proposition one essentially says there's 3 different types of value proposition, each designed to address one of 3 different types of thing that a customer might want. And they've either got a pain, and your value proposition is a pain reliever. I can either offer them a gain, and your value proposition is a gain provider, or they're either just doing their job, and your value proposition helps someone to do the job. And once you've got that picture, and they've got nice symbols and stuff like that, but that's essentially how I've taken that to be. And I know grossly oversimplified a 100-page management book, but essentially there's 3 different. You either help someone with a gain, take away a pain, or just help them to do their job.
And I think we've touched on various subjects around buyer personas and ICPs, ideal customer profiles before, but a lot of that thinking plays into value proposition design, because you have to understand who your customers are, who your buyers are, what they're looking for, what their emotional drivers are, what's their professional drivers. Well, you say that back in
episode 91, the go-to-market strategy one, we talked about that starting out with some concept of value proposition, who therefore is your total addressable market, what's your ideal customer profile within it, and then how you're going to get your customers, the customer acquisition.
Yeah, because you could have a great value proposition that nobody wants, right? Like you might be a great solution to something, but if there's not enough people that have got that problem, then
is there a gap in the market?
We've been there, or is there a market in the gap?
And is there a market in the gap?
I don't know whether it's worth. I did think, and maybe this is being self-indulgent, but for each of these, we could almost go through and say what our business model canvas would say.
Yeah. As long as you thought about it. If you're going to put me on the spot.
But I would say our value proposition, if we were thinking about our value proposition, we've got probably a couple of different customer segments that we're targeting a value proposition at. One would be owner-managed businesses for board-level advice, and the other one would be HubSpot, which if we talked about that, then our value proposition is that we think, the only HubSpot partner in the UK that's got manufacturing expertise.
Well, as it happens, I did some research on that. I've looked up all 200 or so UK HubSpot partners, and none of the others have got manufacturing expertise from experience. They may have helped that sector, but unlike us here, we've been on the shop floor in factories and run factories and done our lab work and all that sort of thing. Yeah, you're right. So that's our USP. So you're saying for the HubSpot side of things, our value proposition is it's not about HubSpot per se, is it? It's about business growth.
It's about business growth. And our board advisory work with 3,000 board meetings, etc. That's something unique about us that is offering value to our potential customer segments.
Yeah, I think the value proposition there, it's sort of taking away a pain and giving a gain. It's not the day job stuff.
No.
And I think for board support, it's taking away some of the worries of lack of control and accountability, and it gives, therefore, some control. It gives the owner some sense that there's a proper sense of governance. But that's very different, like you say, from the HubSpot type of work we do, which is much more about the system-driven way of driving business growth.
So if you've got that kind of value proposition, I think the important point there is to say it's not just one thing. You might have multiple different value propositions within your business, like we just mentioned there, that are addressing different segments. So if we looked at then the customer segment part of it, so who are we providing this value to within the customer segments, that's where you're sort of starting to break down, well, who are we providing these services to? So to contextualize that from a Wellmeadow point of view, we've got our we've got quite a few different personas that we've got, but we've also got different customer segments in terms of board advisory work. And in that, there's probably 2 or 3 different types of companies that we work with that you could probably classify as different segments per se. And then within the HubSpot side of work, we could probably segment that out into 2 or 3 different kind of customer segment groups as well.
Yeah. But if you're trying to come up with customer segments, whether it's for the canvas or just generally as part of your marketing strategy formulation, I think it's important that whatever you decide to segment your customer base on, or even your market on, a subset of which is your customers, that it's got to be something you can actually determine from the outside. There's no point saying, we work with all the ginger-haired directors if that's not a publicly available information.
You should do.
Yeah, and it should be public information.
Bearded.
Ginger-bearded directors. I don't know why that's the first thing that came into my mind when I was fishing for an example there. But anyway, customer segmentation, it's going to be, geographic, demographic, sociographic, all those sorts of things, and something that means something for your business.
Yeah.
And you're right, you can't have that discussion really unless you've had the value proposition discussion. So that's what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and do they actually exhibit those problems or need for gains that you're talking about?
Yeah, you've almost got to do this in tandem, haven't you, really? So it's
well, you might even iterate, mightn't it? You might say, oh, hang on, there's this new sector segment. And then you say, well, hang on, that doesn't really meet the way we've described the value proposition. We must be giving them something else then. And that's where you go in circles. Because, for example, where we've done some private equity-backed businesses before, it's a very different benefit to the owner themselves taking on our board support, for example. They get an insight to something they wouldn't normally see at all. So that's a different type of benefit for them, isn't it? And the same with HubSpot. We have some people who just want a CRM, somewhere to store their stuff, and other people are really interested in using it to drive sales processes and automate marketing and so on.
And so there's different approaches and different things, which I suppose then leads on to, so if we've got your value proposition and then you've got the customer segments that those value propositions are being mapped to, how do you then relate to those customers?
So now we're talking about box number 3.
Box number 3.
Channels. Okay.
Or how do you reach them? So channels is more about how you reach them, isn't it? So this podcast, for example, if we're contextualizing this for Wellmeadow again, is a potential channel of how we reach our customer segments.
Yeah, that's true. We do. I suppose we have a number of different ways of reaching them in that sense. Some of them, it's direct. We may well have marketing activities that drives a connection from them to us as a stranger, classic inbound stuff. So our channels will be digital and social and website and stuff.
Yeah.
And others will be referral. And we have, we're very lucky to have a wide network of referrers who know what we do.
Yep.
And that's another channel.
Yep.
And then the other one is probably more about networking, which is kind of a version of referrers, but more in person.
Yep.
Where just by getting out and about and talking to people. And that's where I think the podcast helps. So you're right, we've got a number of different channels like that, but we're not selling online, for example. That's not one of our channels.
So I suppose, so for probably a more common example would be someone like Apple, who's got physical stores as a channel and also an online presence where you can buy online. Yeah. So it's, but it's worthwhile thinking about this because different channels might apply to different value propositions and different customer segments. So what I like to do sometimes is get a couple of different highlighter pens. And if you've got highlight this value proposition in yellow, that relates to this customer segment over here.
Yeah, it's quite good as well. If you think about disruptors in markets and how they've changed this part of the box entirely. So who was the online shoe company that started off a lot of e-commerce over in the States? And they were widely predicted. Yeah, exactly. Widely predicted as being failures because who on earth would buy shoes online? Surely you've got to try them on.
Yeah.
And they went online and made a success of it. Tesla have done the same. Tesla didn't use the dealer network.
Yeah.
Every other car mark has got a dealer network, which is a huge amount of cost, considering the dealer network doesn't add any value other than location. They don't add any more knowledge than you can get online.
They don't advertise either, do they, really?
Who, Tesla?
Tesla.
No, it's probably another point about that, isn't it? I never see a Tesla advert. Maybe they will now. They're fighting for dominance with BYD from China, but it's all reputation. Everyone knows what Tesla is.
Yeah.
Elon Musk is the face of it all. But the point is they've chosen a very different strategy, if you like, business model, and it's to sell direct to customers. You just get the car delivered on your drive. There's none of this fancy reveal of a car from underneath the sheet and whatever it is fanfare from the dealership.
Yes. So
that's the channels then.
So that's the channels.
So now we can go on to box number 4.
Box number 4, which is customer relationships. So, and this is almost where it kind of maybe comes, it's almost in my head a bit of a loop here, isn't it? Because you've got your value proposition, so you've got something that you can offer. Your channels helps you reach the people that you're offering it to. And then almost then coming back, the customer relationships bit can feed back into your value proposition in that you're getting that feedback from your customer relationship work.
Yeah, it's a nice feedback loop.
And you're learning what works, what doesn't work, and you can then use that to either double down on your value proposition or maybe what you thought was a value proposition wasn't, and there's something else that's making customers tick. And also just building your brand equity, for want of a better word, and just, relationships with customers. So there's lots of different ways to do that. Lots of people use automated support, chatbots, seeing lots more on AI. We've got AI Sebastian on our
we have on our
website, but he doesn't get a lot of action, so he may be being retired to the AI graveyard.
I tend to think of this box, the customer relationship box, as opposed to the channels one, as more what happens after you've won the customer. So I think the channels is how you win customers and how you get that customer in the first place. And the customer relationships one is only really applicable to customers rather than prospects. Yeah. And it's how you serve them. How do you deliver that product to them, and how do you look after them with after-sales service? And that might be in person. And these days, we've changed because we used to have all of our board meetings, for example, in person, and now half of them are online. And we can do support by email, for example, if it's things like that, or using our software, Magic Minutes. So we've got different relationship methods. Others, we have to be more face-to-face, and yet others, like in the HubSpot side, we can deal much further afield by just keeping it online.
Keep it online.
Yeah.
So that's customer relationships.
So that was box 4.
Box 4.
So if we've done the middle and the right now, haven't we?
The
value propositions in the middle, far right was customers, and then we've done the channels and the customer relationships. So let's turn left then. What's left when you go from box 4?
So left of, well, it'd be box 1, wouldn't it, really? Because that's the value proposition.
Far left, go on then. That's the way we start. Well, the value proposition's right in the middle, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then left of that, have you not got the key resources, key activities?
Rights and lefts.
The other left.
The other left, which we're totally lost now.
So we're into the key resources and key activities, and then it goes over into the partnerships. So key resources, that's what assets do you need, which includes people, human resources. So how much of a team do you need internally? And they distinguish here, don't they, between the make-buy decision, effectively. Who do you recruit and who do you have as outsourced partner suppliers? So, what people do you need, what skills, how many?
What equipment.
And then what physical assets, cameras for a podcast. And do you need a physical office space? Do you need vans to drive things around? Do you need stock? Do you need a warehouse? They're all...
And some of this is probably some of the things that are probably a bit more the obvious stuff. You probably could recognise that just looking around the place where you're working.
Certainly the physical assets, but I think the point that's probably more of a differentiator is the intellectual property behind all of that. What is it that you know? Could somebody else copy your business today by having a facsimile copy of your office, maybe even same types of people, without knowing what you know? And often they can't, can they?
Yeah.
And it's because of what you know.
Well, and that's what bleeds into your value proposition as well, sometimes as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
true.
So, and they say like an example of that, again, to Wellmeadification of the example would be Airbnb, which has got a digital platform, software platform like that. Could be an asset or a resource that you've got. Yeah,
key point is that wouldn't exist at all without the digital platform. It's not a channel. It's not just a channel. It is what the business is.
It is the business,
And it's like Uber. All it is really is a clever website.
Yeah.
Or platform, as they would call it. You're right. So that was box 6 or whatever.
Box 6, what you need. So then there's the key activities, which is what is it that you actually do? So are you a customer service-led organisation? Are you a product innovation business? Are you, logistics, marketing? What is it what activities do you do to add value?
What's the bit that people would describe as getting from you?
Yeah.
So are you offering advice? Are you doing things? Are you building things? Are you supplying product? Are you supplying intellectual property? Are you whatever? There's lots of different ways of shaping your activity. But the point of this box on the canvas is to get people in the room to all write down a set of words they can all agree on. What's their communique, if you like, from the board meeting? How do we describe what we actually do? Not the value proposition, because that's the benefits of what we do. But what actually is it that we do? Do we design and deliver furniture, or do we just design furniture and other people deliver it? There's quite a subtle distinction.
Yeah, and it's interesting activity maybe to look at and say, well, what could we do differently with different technology that's coming out? Or are there ways that we can optimize this? When was the last time we actually sat down and really looked at in detail what is it that we do?
Yeah.
And where are the opportunities to improve and optimize that type of thing?
And there's an interesting example. There's a local large-ish marketing agency that have chosen quite a different key activity for how they deliver that service. And it's around building a platform that manages lots of outsourced people.
Yeah.
So they don't tend to have employees. And their core skill, their core activity, and indeed the core resource behind it, is this machine that manages lots of outsourced resources and they're splitting up tasks for clients into lots of little bits, so no one outsourced person gets to see the whole project. It's actually quite a skill, but a very different twist on it, rather than just having a load of people in the office and bouncing ideas around. So different way of defining your business using that box for key activities.
Yep. So then if we go further.
So far left now.
Left.
Do you not do that thing with the thumb of the finger? Which one makes the L?
Do key partnerships. So who is it that you need in order to make your business work? So classic example would be things like Starbucks that need bean producers to help them make their coffee, roasters and growers and all that.
So they're definitely the partners, aren't they?
But they're the partners. So who's it in your business that you need in order to kind of partner with, strategic partnerships in order to...
But they're a big logistics organisation as well. They roast their own, they're a broader company. So do they own the roasters, or do they have suppliers that roasters? Yeah. And then how do they get that to every single Starbucks outlet in the world, of which there must be God knows how many? And that is a decision. Do we own our own logistics fleet or do we use a trusted provider? Yeah. And Amazon had to deal with that a lot with their warehousing solutions early on. They couldn't find someone who could come up with warehousing software that would keep up to pace with their ambitions. So they ended up having to bring that in-house. Nice. So they used to have a partner who was a warehouse software specialist, and they gave up on it. Right. They said they couldn't get that dynamism and innovation that they wanted, and they thought, actually, we know more about this than most of the players in the market. Yeah. So they took it in-house. So this is almost like the make-buy decision. What do we feel is a competitive advantage enough that we do it ourselves? And what of it is a bit of a commodity, or at least widely available in the outside world, and we benefit more from it?
Where do you think the trigger point is on that, between someone being a partner and making that decision for it to become a key resource?
I think, as I said just there a little bit, how critical is it for your business as a differentiator? Yeah. So, we've found both options work for us, whether we have some of our creative work done internally or externally. Yeah. And actually, we get more benefit now externally because it can cope with variations in demand much more readily than if you've got an in-house team. Yeah. And a bit like we used to say to customers with that, you've got a much broader range of skills accessible to you than if you've got an in-house team, with by nature is smaller. So I think it wasn't critical for us to be able to deliver the service we used to deliver on content by being able to do it ourselves necessarily. It was helpful, but it was almost as good to outsource it, and you got other benefits from it. Whereas board support, we've tried before trying to outsource a bit of chairing of board meetings back in the very early days. Haven't done it for 10 years. And that's why we don't do it anymore, because we couldn't. Yeah. We found that there are very few people that know how to chair 3,000 board meetings because they just haven't done it. So we had to keep that in-house. So I think it's about competitive advantage, I would say. So I think we've covered all the top row of boxes. There's just two left now then, the financial ones.
How do you make money, and how much does it cost you to make that money?
Yeah, get the money in and spend it.
So you've got the revenue streams, which sits underneath the more customer focused, the channels, customer relationships and segments. So that's where does your money come from? How do you make money? Is it subscriptions? Is it one-off sales? Is it...
And a lot of people regard this as almost trivially obvious. Well, we sell what we do, don't we? And we invoice it. It actually triggers quite a lot of interesting debates around the fringes. So the value proposition itself, you'd think, would be fairly self-explanatory. If that's what customers see value in theory, that's what we're selling and that's what we invoice for. But there's all sorts of bits around that, like customization. We've got a client that customizes nearly every product. Every standard product that they say they sell gets customized. Do they charge for that? Well, that's a decision. That's a strategic decision. Do we offer that as part of the package, that there's almost something built into the price that everybody's going to want a tweak here or a change of that dimension, so we just do it? Or is actually what we're about a customizer of standard products? What do we do?
And you could look at things like, well, do you have a freemium model? Do you have things that, will we give you this bit for free, or do we discount a certain number of, we have various discounting things for volumes of hours bought, and there's lots of different ways to do it. And again, I think some of this feeds back into, well, what is your value proposition? What are your customer segments? What are they expecting? And then how agile are you and dynamic are you in looking at your pricing strategy, looking at your kind of, are there new opportunities to see cross-sell, upsell, that type of thing?
Yeah. Are you leaving stuff on the table? Are you giving away things that the customers value? Or have you made a strategic decision to bundle that in with other things so that it's seen as a good way of selling the rest of it?
Do you look at we had a conversation this week or last week, I can't remember, about someone was looking at servicing for equipment. Yeah. And then we were looking at, why don't we treat that like an insurance premium or an insurance model type of approach? And just looking at maybe, well, how does another industry charge? Okay, it may not seem immediately obvious how that transfers over into your sector, but there's probably a lot more crossover if you start thinking about it creatively. And
sure.
So that's the revenue side of it, and then the cost side of it is just looking at, well, what's this going to cost us in terms of direct costs, indirect costs? What kind of overheads have we got?
Well, and also, what is it that costs? Yeah. Is it actually that last 5% of customization that costs all the money? That 80-20. Where does the cost really come from? And there's techniques like value-added analysis, value-added engineering, where you try and break down all of the value that the customer sees, and you try and map that to, well, how much does it cost to deliver that bit of value? And maybe, the delivery in 24 hours at the end has huge value but doesn't cost you very much. Or the customization of that little bit has a little bit of value but actually costs you an enormous amount because of the disruption. So I think the structure of your costs in terms of what you have to do and what you don't, that's important.
Yeah.
But like you say there about how much of it can you make variable that's currently fixed? Because a lot of businesses really struggle when they've got big fixed costs, don't they? Especially if they've got variable demand.
And I think, given the current climate that we're in, I think there'll be more and more businesses looking at how do we variabilize our costs. And that may not necessarily mean outsourcing it all to some other country, which is actually there's a trend to onshore, or at least there was.
Reshoring,
Reshoring. But I think it's that we are in a climate now, I think, where businesses probably need to think about this, or they are thinking about this in a much more kind of tangible issue to have to deal with, isn't it?
For sure, yeah. And we talked there about reshoring. We talked about maybe turning some things into variable costs. Even things like office space used to be regarded as a fixed cost for everybody. And yet now with the flexible working and work from home, a lot of big companies are selling off property left, right and centre, surrendering leases, not renewing, and having a much more sort of flexible, dynamic way of working. So their whole infrastructure costs of running a business are very different. And then there's a lot more of a trend for outsourcing, as we've seen it ourselves. People were outsourcing to us things to do, which maybe used to get done in-house.
Well, and I think as well as roles become more specialist as well. So whereas marketing was maybe you could have there's a few roles in marketing. Now there's probably hundreds.
Yeah, true.
When you break it all down to all the different technologies, all the different channels, all the different things.
Well, you can't keep up.
You can't keep up, and no one person can do everything. So by outsourcing, you've got that ability to get the best of both worlds, flex your costs, and get the expertise. So
it does make you think again about the ROI on it. It's funny how managers regard the cost of an in-house employee very differently to how they regard it when they outsource it. They don't think in terms of day rates when you've got an employee, but you're still paying a day rate.
Yeah.
It's just it's the same day rate, same 5 days every week. And yet there's a much laxer attitude to whether I'm getting a return on that, what's happening. Yeah. So I think it does focus the mind a bit. Now I've got to write a check every time I ask for that thing to be done. Yeah. Do I really want it? It's not about discipline.
So I think as well, just on the costs quickly as well, you've got the sort of cost of acquisition, cost of customer acquisition.
Yeah.
And that should really be viewed in light of the lifetime value over on the revenue box of the particular customer or client that you've got, and then comparing those two numbers of what's it cost us to acquire a customer, what's it cost us in terms of what do we make in terms of the lifetime of that customer.
Yeah, true. And it's an adage, isn't it, that all the time the lifetime value of a customer is greater than the cost of acquisition. Do more acquisition, spend more money on acquisition until you reach some sort of sweet spot, tipping point. Good. So we've done quite a tour there of reasonably complex subject.
Yep.
A business plan on a page.
And there's loads more in it. He goes through lots of the different business models, about 5 or 6 different business models, which I won't go into now. There's also a section in the book around storytelling, using the business model canvas to tell the story, which, as you mentioned before, we've used that for various investment memorandums we've made, where we're trying to get across the story of the business to an investor or a funder.
And you do tell a good story.
I can spin a yarn. I've got a good one about ants.
Maybe save that for next time.
But yeah, so it's well worth having a look at the book. If nothing else, go online. I think we may have a copy of the business model canvas on our website, on our resources page, our insights page. And yeah, if you get 5 minutes this week, it's well worth getting a copy of it, print it off from either our website or just find one online. They're easy to find.
There's loads of them. Just search for it, and the images that crop up are...
Have a coffee and just write it down out of intellectual curiosity.
Yeah. How would you describe it? Show it to your business colleagues and see if they agree.
See what they agree.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, with thanks then to Alex Osterwalder and his company Strategizer. And it sounds like a whole army of people who co-created it as part of his crowdsourcing of content. He produced a really neat little model, and it's really stuck. It's been around for a few years now, and you see it referred to quite a lot.
Time.
Yeah, good. So we still find it very useful, and so that's a brief introduction for anybody Googling around for some information on it. There's a long form description of what it's all about.
Yep.
Good. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for finding that and prepping that episode for us. Thanks again to you as well for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. Turns out it was episode 97, getting very close to 100. I hope you stay tuned for the big 3-digit breakthrough in a couple of weeks' time. So, as I say every week, please pass on the word to your friends and business colleagues that Wellmeadow's here trying to help businesses to grow, and this podcast is one way we're trying to get the word out for that. We're doing very well on YouTube at the moment. Please pop over there and subscribe to that channel if that's where you like to get your videos from. Lots of shorts and trailers for you to digest what we do in bite-sized chunks. In the meantime, good luck with your business.